You seem to be refuting single-step evolution. What do you have to say about cumulative evolution?
I would say there is no cumulative evolution. It takes place in the imagination. They would like to believe that it happens if you give it billions of years, but there is no proof that it's happened. If you ask an evolutionist, if we really came about by gradual changes, why do we see no kinds of animals changing today? Would you please give me your best example of a transitional form alive today? Lots of animals are still having babies. Let's see one today, okay? If they say, well, we don't live long enough to see this change, okay, well then let's see one in the fossil record. Archaeopteryx is a lousy example. First place, it's not a missing link. It's a bird. It's 100% bird, a perching bird with toes. One toe goes backwards to grab the tree branches. I'll prove that if you'd like, if I get a minute. But absolutely 100% modern birds are found in rock layers that they date at 130 to 140 million years old, which is way before dinosaurs went extinct. So he said several times tonight that dinosaurs turned to birds, and I'm telling you folks, even by their geologic column, the birds were already here 130 million years ago. And I've got the evidence for that in a different presentation. It'll take me a minute to find that, but it didn't happen. There is no evidence whatsoever for this macroevolution. It only takes place, you have to imagine that it happened. And I'm sure we'll get a response like, well, we see these little changes, and if we had long enough time is the hero to the plot. And I'm telling you, it doesn't help. Okay? Everything falls apart with time. It doesn't get better. Thank you.
Let me address a couple of the false statements that Dr. Hovind has just made. He said that Archaeopteryx was 100% bird. That's absolutely not true. Archaeopteryx has many characteristics of reptiles and not of birds. In fact, most of its skeletal properties are those of reptiles. Claws at the end of the arms or wings, teeth, bony tail. Find me a bird that has those, and then I'll admit that it's 100% bird. But until then, he says that dinosaurs couldn't have evolved into birds because the birds were there before the dinosaurs were gone. Well, so what? There were dinosaurs there 200 million years ago, and some of them evolved into birds 140 million years ago. Other dinosaurs were still there. So what? Let me use the rest of my time to just point out that the so-called circular argument about the geologic column is totally false. The geologic column was not based on fossils originally. It was not based on evolution. He may have managed to find some really bad textbooks to quote, but no scientist no geologist would tell you that the geologic column is based on evolution. It was there before evolution was even thought of.
Going back to starting with again, Professor Paulson, the question simply, how does evolution explain symbiotic relationships? And by that I take it that they're talking about relationships such as the honeybee and flowers that are utilized by the honeybee, totally different separate species.
I'll give an example. Again, I'm not an ecologist, so I don't know specific examples, but there's one example of an insect and a cactus, I think it is, that are totally dependent on one another. The cactus needs the insect for pollination. The insect needs the cactus for food. And the argument of the creationists is, well, how could they have evolved? Because if you took either one away, they wouldn't be able to survive. But all you have to think about is that in the past, some point in the past, there may have been several insects that fed on that cactus, and several different plants on which that several different insects that could pollinate that cactus, and several different plants on which that particular insect could survive. But with time, some of the other plants and insects died out. That cactus changed gradually so that it became more dependent on just that insect, and that insect became more dependent on just that plant. So there's no contradiction. In fact, those are good examples of how evolution can work.
Okay, I think this illustrates clearly what I said earlier. You have to imagine that evolution happened. It could have been, might have been. Go back and play the tape when you get it. That's all they have, folks, is speculation. All you have to do is imagine there might have been another insect. Of course, we don't have any proof of this. This is my point exactly. Evolution is a religion. You have to believe in these things. There's certainly no evidence for it. The fact is, we do have an enormous number of symbiotic relationships. Termites cannot digest cellulose. They can only chew it up and swallow it. The critters that live in their intestines digest the cellulose. Now, those little critters cannot live outside of the termite, and the termite cannot live without those critters, so which one evolved first, and how did it survive without the other one? You'd have to go through all sorts of imagination of how, well, it might have done a different purpose, might have something else. Okay, you can imagine all you want, but this is my point. You're outside of science at that point. And just because a person has really good science in some areas does not mean he doesn't frequently try to sneak his religious worldview in with his science. And that's what's happened. That's what happens in all the universities, and it's tragic, and somebody ought to put a stop to it, and I'm working on it as hard as I can. And again, the hero to the plot was time, as if time is going to do it. How much time do I have left? We're leaving an awful lot of stuff hanging here, and I'd love to go back, and I've been accused of being a liar about 10 times tonight. I'd love to go back and get a specific example and stay on just one. But this article says, dinosaurs are alive as birds. USA Today, October 99. Dinosaurs, they found a new missing link. National Geographic, new missing link, proof for evolution. A couple months later, oops, sorry, it's a fraud. This stuff happens all the time, okay? We can go through this a bunch if you like. Textbook says dinosaurs turn to birds. There we go. Alan Fiducia, one of the world authorities on birds, said at University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill, he said, paleontologists have tried to turn Archaeopteryx into an earthbound feathered dinosaur, which is what you're trying to do tonight, but it's not. It's a bird, a perching bird, and no amount of paleo-babble is going to change that. Archaeopteryx had...
Time is up.
Watch video number 4 to get the rest of it.
This next question again is for you, Dr. Hovind. If you believe that the universe was created 6,000 years ago, how do you explain rocks dating back millions and billions of years? Doesn't carbon dating prove millions of years?
I've had this one open 3 times hoping we'd get to this, and now here we are. It's going to take me a minute to get there. I cover this in great detail on my website, or video number 7 about carbon dating. Carbon dating, I wish we had 2 hours to go through how it works. I'm very familiar with it. It doesn't work at all, and I'll show you why. Based on several obvious assumptions, and a freshman law student could take it apart in a courtroom. Living mollusk shells, carbon dated 2,300 years old. Science Magazine, volume 144. Freshly killed seal, carbon dated 1,300 years old. Antarctic Journal, volume 6. Shells from living snails, carbon dated 27,000 years old. One part of a mammoth, carbon dated 29,000 years old. Another part dated 44,000 years old. Geological Survey, professional paper 862. Baby edema, carbon dated. One part was 40,000, another part's 26,000, and the wood next to it is 9,000. The lower leg of a mammoth, carbon dated 15,000 years old. The skin was 21,000 years old. 2 mammoths side by side gave ages of 22,000 and 16,000. Living penguins dated 8,000 years old. They had in Berkeley, California, the most advanced dating center we have. Tried to date Homo erectus fossils. They thought it would be 250,000. He kept making the same startling find. Swisher said the fossils are 53,000 years at most and 27,000 years old, at least. What I'd like to point out, Your Honor, that's a 96% error. I think this is a little bit less than an exact science.
It's time.
Okay.
I'm not familiar with all these examples that Dr. Hovind is pulling up, but I am familiar with one of them because it's one that's been repeated many times by creationists, and it's totally misleading. There are indeed snails that have been dated, living snails which have been dated to 3,000 years old. But there are times when radiocarbon dating is not applicable. Radiocarbon dating assumes that the carbon in the organism came from the atmosphere. In the atmosphere, the amount of carbon-14 is fairly constant because cosmic rays are hitting the atmosphere and converting nitrogen into carbon-14. But those snails picked up their carbon from carbonate rocks that had dissolved into the stream where they were living. And because of that, the carbonate rocks were very old, and the carbon that was in the carbonate rocks was very deficient in carbon-14 compared to carbon dioxide that's in the air. And that's why those snails appeared to be very old. In fact, carbon dating has been applied to tree rings, and the correspondence between the tree rings and the carbon dates has been shown to be very accurate. It's actually, the expected error is about 10% because the amount of carbon-14 in the atmosphere seems to vary, and it has been shown to vary over the last 100 years or so based on, it varies, and it's correlated with activity on the sun, which is correlated with the amount of cosmic rays. In fact, carbon-14 is not used for dating rocks at all. It's only used for dating things less than 50,000 years old. The carbon-14 half-life is too short to use for dating longer things. And so the other elements that I mentioned back in the beginning of my presentation are used for dating rocks.
The next question is for both speakers. Either one of you can start, whoever would like to go first. The question is, right now science is arguing the evidence of design. What is the nature of this argument and importance of design in this discussion?
You want to go first? Okay. If I understand, the question is, what is the importance of the argument from design? You know, things appear to be designed. I would say it's real simple. There was a designer, and I happen to know him personally. The argument from design was Paley's argument that frustrated Darwin for years, and Darwin in his book, The Origin of Species, where he never did really address the origin of species. I've got the book out in the car. I'm sorry I was late. I didn't have time to set everything up here tonight. But the argument from design is as yet unanswered. If you find a 15-inch rim and a 15-inch tire, you would assume the tire was designed to fit the rim. And they are, of course. We find billions of examples in the world where things are obviously designed for what they do. The evolutionist has this enormous amount of faith, and I do really greatly admire their faith, to believe that these things could happen by chance. Well, again, you're welcome to believe that, but that's not science. That's your religious belief. Now, people hold to that religious belief for various different reasons. We could get into that if you'd like, but the fact is it's not scientific. It looks to be everything's designed. And you don't have to see the designer to believe he exists. I've got a watch made in Japan. Casio Databank holds 300 phone numbers. Calculator, stopwatch, countdown timer. Does not tell time. You have to look at it. But this is really an amazing machine. I don't have to see the designer to believe he exists. I've never been to Japan. I can stand here in America and say, wow, that guy must be smart. That's logical. I can look at a single cell under the microscope, and one cell is more complex than the space shuttle. And I can say, wow, the designer must be really smart. That's just logical. There had to be a designer.
I think what the question is referring to as the argument from design is a recent thing that comes out of discoveries in physics and so forth, that the universe is very finely tuned to make life possible. Supposedly, if some of the basic constants of carbon atoms were just a little bit different, not enough carbon would have formed in the centers of stars long ago to even make life possible. There's an assumption, which I must say I don't like, in what Dr. Hovind says. There's an assumption that someone who believes in evolution does not believe in God. But that is not true. I believe that there's a designer and that he made the universe as a whole.